Hey there guys, and welcome back. So we have the bolt sorter, and as expected it is a major amazing piece of work that totally works exactly how I expected it to and has no issues whatsoever. So anyway, moving on, just to review how this whole entire thing works. We've got a grill right here that the bolts sit in. And as it lowers down, obviously the depth to the table or whatever you're working on will determine whether or not the bolts are hanging freely or if they're being pushed up from below. We'll talk more about that in a second, but as discussed on the design stream, I went ahead and got myself some M3 rods. M3 rods are something I've wanted for various projects for a while now and have not done. I've just defaulted to M3 bolts instead. So I was happy to pick those up, but we will talk more about those rods when we get there. Just laying out how we're set up right here. The next thing to note about the design, well, I guess the first thing to note is I did opt for the fancier funnel as promised. Again, this is not necessary. This funnel design, I could have gone with a much simpler, straightforward funnel design, which we did on stream. But again, it's YouTube, so I went for the nicer layered look here. The bubble vial again is there just to make sure that we are level. The importance of being level is when we get down to, let's see if I can get the really small guys. So when we get down to guys that are 1 millimeter in difference, which are the guys at the smallest end, and these guys are actually the same size, so that's a bad example, but down at the smaller end of my box, there is only a 1 millimeter difference between sizes, which means that across the length of this grill, a little bit of deviation actually can make a difference, in theory. So that is why I've got the bubble level on there. In theory, if you don't have bolts that are that close together, aren't 1 millimeter, close, chances are you can get away with not doing it. You can get away with leaving the bubble vial off. Otherwise, this is something that I added off stream because I was using it and I kept on getting myself confused because I'm awesome like that. I did write the direction for up and down on the tops of the knobs before I put the CAD up on printables. I will go ahead and just have that be embossed or engraved, whatever the heck it is. Engraved is actually more correct. I believe embossed is outward. So engraved on the knob heads, that way you don't have to write it yourself. And then the other thing I did was just put this little hash mark right here, just so that I know, just to give me a point of reference when I'm spinning them, because these are 2 millimeter pitch screws. So what that means is, since most of our bolts are 1 or 2 millimeters in difference, we can simply count how many turns we do. So if we start out with this hash mark right here facing us, then going halfway around means that we've lowered the mechanism by 1 millimeter. And doing a full turn means that we've lowered it by 2 millimeters. So that's the way we can go ahead and keep track of what size bolt we're at. Once we get a reference, so for example, once we get to, let's say, well, we'll start at 30. If we have a 30 millimeter bolt, then we know out of this particular pack that we're going to have to turn it 2.5 times to get down to 25, and then 2.5 times after that to get down to 20. And then after that, it's just one full turn for all of these down to 6 millimeter. So that's one way we can identify which size bolts we're pulling out of here. The other thing, however, and I should set this back to level really quick before I forget. The other thing, however, is if we do not know what size bolts we have at all, once we get to the first bolt, once we get the first bolt popped up, we can measure that with a pair of calipers, and that gives us a reference, and then we can just keep track from there. So rather than saying, okay, I know that I have to move it 2.5 times before I get to the next bolt size, well, in that case, it's not, in that case, we just count until we hit the next bolt size, and then we just do the math, right? Every half a turn, again, is 1 millimeter. So that will give us all our bolt sizes going up to there. So, all the information out of the way, and obviously you can see test/scrap prints in the back here. We'll get to that at the end before, in the second half. So I'm going to go ahead and out of my box of unfortunate disasters, toss it in here. As you can see, nuts automatically fall through as expected because they're significantly smaller. So I'll just toss those aside. And next thing to note is you see this gap right here over here where I didn't put a rod. That is not actually because I only ordered 10 rods and I have 11 slots here. It's not because of that. I had talked about on stream that I would just cut these down to make up for it. Wouldn't be that big of a deal. This is actually because you're going to go ahead and shake this, and one of those things may be loud in the microphone, so apologize in advance, but, you know, we can shake this to get however many we want to get into here, and then we can just knock the rest of the guys out, you know? So that is why I left that one open. That way it's just easy to knock any extra ones out, and we just save those for the next batch, right? So as you can see, I've already got one standing up here, so let me back up then. And I'm just going to back up, or I'm sorry, negative. See, I wrote negative on here and I'm still getting myself confused. Negative would go down, so we are going up, and my hands are not moving at the same speed, so I'll have to re-level really quick. And I'm just going to go up until I have none standing up. And that looks to be it. Ooh, I did not see this guy here from my perspective, so we toss that guy down. Alright, so yeah, nothing's dragging on the floor. I'll get myself to this hash mark here, and then I will level on this side so that we're even. Let's see, right about there. I'm just looking at the bubble gauge. There we go. Until I'm centered, and I am more or less centered right here. So I will just get myself so that these two are lined up in reference, and now we can start going down until that one that we saw standing up stands up again. And I'll just do one turn on each side so that I don't get myself confused here. And that's actually going up again because and this is why I have these minus things on here. That way I can, it's gonna take some adjustment for me because I only just put them on when I did my first batch of screws here. So it's gonna take some adjustment for me to get used to the process myself, but minus is down, which made sense when I put it on there and made sense when I'm saying out loud, but for some reason I keep it going in the wrong direction. So we now have this one guy standing up here. If you can see him kind of floating around there because he's pressing against the table. Now this does bring up one tiny problem, and by tiny problem I mean it could be pretty significant, but you see how he keeps on wanting to fall over? So right here he is standing straight up, and then I move it a little bit more and he falls over. And that is one problem because if I had multiple of these guys, I might not see all of them standing up because they might be, some might be leaning over. So what I decided to do, let me just slide these back so that I don't get caught while I do this, was grab some magnets out of my box and create something so that, as you can see now, that one guy is definitely sticking up. He's not going to fall over because this base is stuck to the magnet. So using some magnets underneath help. It's not 100% necessary, but it helps. So I will be doing that here. And at this point, honestly, we are sticking up more than we should be. It looks like maybe it's a good 3 or 4 millimeters when we should only be standing up just a little bit. So as we go down here, we won't necessarily, the next one I should say, the next one might not necessarily be right on. So for what I mean by that is, so let's take our calipers here, pretend we don't know what size this is, okay? So this says 30 on the calipers, which is what I kind of expected. I figured that I probably have at least one of the biggest ones in there. So we have a 30. In theory, I should have to go down 2.5 times here, but because he was sticking up so high, because again, I wasn't using the magnet, so he did not stick up immediately. I had to keep on turning until I realized that he was going. For that reason, we may not go 2.5 here. Just for the record. So that's one. That's one. Still nothing. That guy. Yeah, so this guy on the bottom left here. Let me do this with the camera to give you a little bit better view. And I will slide this over as well. So as you can see, I have one guy now that is stuck here, and he is just barely stuck. So this probably is exactly at this setting on the dials right here is most likely exactly at the 25mm mark, but just for the sake of the experiment, yep, my calipers do say 25mm, so that goes in 25mm box. And now, again, because I know my sizes, I can go 2.5 from here, and that will get me my 20s. And from there, it's only one full spin until we get down to the smallest guys. And I'm only going to do a few more of these, and then we'll talk about the design, because obviously it's going to take a little while. Plus, I've got a lot to do. So we'll get to that discussion though later. So minus goes down. So this is 1, 2, and now 1/2, and 1, 2, and 1/2, and all right. Let's see here, the magnet. Okay, so here's an interesting one here, right? Because this guy's sticking way up, which means that I just missed him. So the magnet, if you can see here, is not actually covering my whole entire space, which is a little bit of an issue. So it does introduce a little bit of error on my part, because I did not pull all the magnets out that I have. I have a full box, so I could have lined this whole entire area and then I would not have that problem, but that is not the case. So one of those things, I already know that's a 25mm because it definitely is not a 30. Otherwise it would have shown up, but at this point, these guys are definitely 20s right here, so I will just drop them right in without even checking. And it looks like, yeah, the rest of these are barely touching. So one of those things, again, back to a little bit of variance in the mechanism, in where these screw knobs are exactly lined up, can lead to this, but it's not that big of a deal, because these guys are just touching, they're not actually standing up. And even if I move the magnet this way, they don't stand up. Again, if the magnet was larger, I wouldn't have to move it, but the point being is that these guys are not hotter that bit, but I do know that I can go down by 1 full turn on each side. And that's why I have this hash mark here, because I tend to lose track myself. And now these guys that the magnet is 100% pulling. So this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy are all going to be 18s. And if I line them up in my hand, you know, they're all the same size. And I'm sure if I take the calipers just to confirm, they come out at 18. So again, and that guy actually looks like he is also, let's see, is he? Nope, looks like he was just stuck. Yeah, okay, that's it for this batch, it looks like. So again, we would just carry on. I would turn it 1 full knob to get it down to the 16s, pull the 16s out, and so on and so forth. So again, I'm not going to spend all stream doing that, sorting all these guys out like that. I will do that off stream. Let's, however, talk about various things with the design. So let's see, where do we want to start? I already talked about the knobs. The rods, as expected, can sit out here. Now, actually, yeah, I guess since I'm talking about the rods, we'll talk about the grill itself. I'm using rods here because that made sense, and I've been looking for an excuse to. Let me change the camera back now that we're not doing the demo. There we go. To get a bigger view of the desk. There we go, there we go. So, I've been looking for an excuse to get M3 rods for various projects that I've just been, again, defaulting to M3 bolts, or I guess 3mm rods for M3 bolts. The reason why, well, the problem with M3 bolts, I'm going to say, is, for example, on the sliders, the sliders use springs, and the springs tend to grate against the M3 bolt is my biggest issue, which is why I wanted the M3 rods. So that's one of the reasons. The other reasons is that I can get these in much different sizes than these bolts. So the bolts are nice, but being able to get the exact size I want just by cutting this down is a lot easier than hacking an M3 bolt down. Not that it's not possible, but it's just more straightforward and simple to do the rod. And furthermore, the rod does not have the head on the end of the bolt, so that is a plus when it comes to designing, because that's not going to be sticking out in that case. So that's why I went with M3 rods. However, had I spent a little bit more time thinking about it, it may have been, and one of those things, thinking about it as we got in here, it may have made more sense, I should say, to just print the grill. The reason I did not print the grill is because, generally speaking, it is cheaper to use materials on hand than to use plastic. Plastic is, well, it adds up, really, is what it comes down to. You may sit there and go, it's pretty cheap, and I'm just gonna print this and whatever. But the more you end up printing, the more you end up taking that cheap mentality, the more it really does add up. So I did want to use materials on hand, and again, I can pull these rods out and use them for other projects, whereas I can't pull the plastic out and use it for other projects. Saving, shredding it, and it's one of those things I've been thinking about shredding, building a shredder for my plastic, which is why I've been holding on to it and not been throwing test pieces out. This makes sense for me as somebody who does this on YouTube and therefore does a lot of printing, but at the same time, even though it makes sense for me, it is still expensive to get started up. So that is why I've not done it yet. But that is one reason why it is useful to use these rods instead of printing the grill. The benefit, however, and the reason why I said I probably should have printed the grill, is you see how these are kind of sitting on an angle? That exacerbates the heads right here. Let me grab the tweezers just to more clearly point so my fingers aren't in the way. These guys are kind of sitting at weird angles in here because the rods are round. If I printed this grill with square slots out of plastic, then this would work better. These would definitely be standing straight up in this orientation. They might still tilt left to right as you're looking at it on the screen right here, so towards the front end and towards the back end from my orientation. It may still, or not may, they almost certainly would still tilt in those orientations, but it would take some of the tilt out in the other direction. So that's why actually printing this with square slots would be useful. Part of the reason I did not, however, just counter argument here, is because I'd have to do a few test prints probably, because again, my printer does not print 100% accurately, and you'd want that in order to justify this whole entire zero clearance here. You'd want this to be printed as tight as possible, right? Would make sense, otherwise you're not really justifying printing it. And therefore, it might take one or two test prints to get this spacing just right for my printer, so that these bolts don't get jammed up in here, which would be an issue, especially because again, they have threads, and threads can get caught up on the plastic, kind of like how I was talking about threads getting caught up on the springs. So that is one thing to mention about the grill itself. The funnel, again, I would not recommend printing the fancy funnel. Just get the square funnel. That's all you need. And let's see, anything else with the design? Not directly. We will now talk about tweaks and changes I had to make. So I was trying to get this done for Saturday morning. Obviously, we did not stream it Saturday morning. And this was printed in 0.3 millimeter layer height, which is what I've been printing everything in recently, because when I print, I have a lot to print, and therefore I need it done as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, and let's see, yeah, you can see that the threads completely died, so I printed both of these, and at 0.3 millimeters, the overhang was just horrendous. The rest of these, that test piece, and then one of these two were first, the other one was second, doesn't necessarily matter which. These were done at 0.15 millimeter, and they turned out just fine, no problems whatsoever. So 0.15 is the name of the game. I said on stream that it's been a long time since I've printed threads, but I recalled it being something like 0.08 millimeter offset. these ended up just at my typical 0.2. So the first one definitely didn't fit. The second one did not fit for a different reason, but starting from the second one, I went to the 0.2 millimeter offset. And as you can see here, that's what this is. Obviously it works. It is snug, it doesn't really have backlash, so works exactly like you would expect at the 0.2 millimeter offset. The problem with the second of these guys, again, not sure which one was first, but the problem with the second of these guys is that in the model, I put one screw in, and then I mirrored the screw over to the other side, like I do with everything. The issue there is that when you mirror a screw, you go from having right-hand threads to left-hand threads. So I realized when I went to screw the second one in, which I was pretty sure was going to work because I was all the way up at 0.2 millimeter offset, I still couldn't get the screw in. And I went, wow, that is weird. Why can't I screw this in? It seems like I can't imagine that I have to go to like 0.3 or 0.4 offset on these screws. And I looked at the model, and sure enough, I had mirrored it over, and therefore the screws were backwards. So we did some more printing, and it went, obviously, as you can see here. So once that got fixed, I went ahead and printed out the full set, and that was the whole story. The funnel and everything here, in theory, I'm going to say they printed just fine. Let me dump these out really quick just so I can show you the bottom. They printed out well enough. I did not change anything. I did not actually change anything on the model, but okay, I'm not actually seeing it now that I have it all together. Maybe a little bit along this edge. So it did seem like maybe I printed it a little bit large. Again, my printer printed it a little bit large, because before I had the grill in here, I noticed a little bit of bowing on these edges from obviously being too large and getting jammed in there. But it looks like now that the grill's in there, that took care of it, and it's working just fine. Obviously, everything's in there. Everything is at the correct height it should be. So that's that. The rods, I think I had these at like maybe 3/5, I can't remember, of the diameter to have them press in and snap in. It probably could go a little bit higher. They work just fine. Yeah, they work just fine, but I'm a little concerned that in theory, if I pulled these out to use them for something and put them back in, that they may not grip after doing that once or twice more. So it might possibly be better to sink them in a little bit further into the grill. This bubble vial, more or less, my only problem was that I did not have enough grip on it. It would pop out, you know, where I had it. So I just basically, again, adjusted how deep it was snapping in. That was just a minor change there. And let's see. Oh, and the final change was just how these rods were laid out. So originally I had this first rod laid out right up against the edge. I decided to actually put it halfway in the edge because it occurred to me that bolts in theory could get stuck between the edge of the rod and the wall, whereas if I put it halfway in the wall, they can't get stuck because obviously they're halfway through there. So that was the last change, and then the only other thing I did was just recalculate, do a proper mathematical calculation for the spacing of these rods, which I have Fusion up, so let me just go ahead and mention that. So parameters, let's see, and actually I'll go ahead and kick you over, that's fine. You can come over here and watch with me. So I got rod size here, space between rods, and then the opening size. The opening size on the grill should always be the same exact one. You just grab the default grill, and the default grill that's over here in bolt sorter, that will be in the mesh, you know. So you can pull that out. That inside of it will be 70.2. And then this was the equation I got for the number of bars. And this was the remainder, again, just to refresh your memory. This is how that looks. So this right here is the remainder. So in theory, if my numbers were different, let me just delete that really quick. The remainder might be like this instead. Again, it depends what the size of the rods are and what the size of the spacing is determines how much space would be left over between this wall and where the first rod goes. So that's what remainder is, how it's calculated. And again, let me hit Control Z one more time. Down here, this is just, actually, that should say rod size plus spacing. I don't know if it's one of those things where I hit the FX accidentally or something like that. I don't know why that wasn't rod size plus spacing, but that's all that is. And then bars plus 1, because we have the bars here and then our extra plus 1. Again, the plus 1 is split, half on this side and half on that side. So that is the deal. And also, if I were to do another one of these, I would come in here and, as previously mentioned, just delete that hole. Leave that as a solid slot. That way you have somewhere to knock the extra ones off of, so you're not digging in there and trying to get them all standing straight up, or otherwise pulling them back out manually. So that is the wrap up. Those are the changes I made on the bolt sorter. Where's my camera at? There's my camera. And yeah, again, one of these things, you know, probably could be done by now. Well, definitely could be done by now. I mean, if we count all the time I spent printing, all the time I spent... Well, again, printing does not actually take my time, right? I hit the go button and then it goes. But test pieces, doing the tweaks on the test pieces, doing the assembly, doing the initial design, doing the various others, like the glue up here. So these did not press in as well. These feet did not press in as well as I expected them to. So I did end up taking just some glue. One of those things. I have this sitting right next to me from a printer. So I just took an X-Acto knife, scraped off some glue, stuck it on the inside, and then pressed it in to make sure they did not fall out. But anyway, any work that I did on this, you know, could have gone to getting this box actually sorted out, and I'd probably be done by now. How much work would I have to save doing this with that? Honestly, I'm not sure if it even lines up, to be perfectly honest, but I think this is an interesting idea nonetheless. And by lineup, I mean, I don't know that there's any amount of bolts because we have to do it in a certain number of batches. That would save me enough time. But again, part of the adventure is the designs, it's the interesting ideas, so I'm happy with it. You know, it's something interesting that I was able to make, and it's got certain mechanisms that, you know, may be useful in the future. So overall, like I said, quite happy with how it turned out, happy to do it. Don't really feel it's a waste or anything like that. So overall, I gotta say, good stream, good design stream, good review, good mechanics, etc, etc, etc. And yeah, that's it. So as for the rest of the channel, if you're looking forward to projects, the Dremel press, I realized I made a rather serious miscalculation on. I have it completely assembled. It actually took like 2 full nights of my spare time to get all the materials cut and prepped and assembled, and then that was like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I was pretty busy, so I didn't really get much work on it, but I did get some, and I did final tweaking to it this morning. And then I went to do my first test drill with it, with the Dremel press, and I realized I had seriously overlooked a certain aspect of it. So while it is functionally together and it's doing what it's supposed to do, what I overlooked, I'm beating around the fence, beating around the bush here, just because it's one of those things. It's going to be its own video, so I don't want to repeat myself here. But what I overlooked seriously limits what it can do, unfortunately. So I'm going to do one more design change to it. That's going to take some amount of hours to print because it's a rather large piece. But once we get that design change in, then it should be good to go. And then after, well, not after the Dremel press, but The next project I want to do is, for this design specifically, I wanted to use PLA, wanted to get some of my PLA used up, and as normal, my Prusa just plain hates PLA. So I really have to get my Ender 3 back up and running for PLA if I want to actually use up the PLA that's been sitting in a box for like 2 years now. And that means that it may be time to actually go ahead and resume work on my Ender 3 electronics case. And I've got a different tact on it. So I've mentioned the Ender 3 electronics case on stream before as a project that I was working on before I started streaming. I am going to go a different direction with that. So that is going to be a design video or design stream probably today. Light Lake, I again was quite busy this week in between A, using 2 full nights for the drama press, and B, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday being kind of busy for myself. So I have not actually had any time programming Light Lake, but I am intent on getting that back running and finishing it off, because we are pretty close to done. Well, relatively close to done. So I do think that will be not a stream tonight. So it won't be a stream tonight, but hopefully Monday I'll be able to stream the next installment of that video series. And beyond that, don't have to pick out a new video game. I have a number of video games picked out, but we did just finish playing the Grim Quest demo, if you're interested in seeing how that went. But at this point, being through the demo and not interested in the full game, I will be streaming some other game in the near future. Just got to figure out which one I want to play. And let's see. The other projects that have been sitting on the back burner, I should be getting back to. The coiler uncoiler, I have not picked out a motor yet for. Again, the motor I had originally that I was hoping I would just be able to gear up, I could not gear up enough. There was just too much friction in the system for the gearing to actually overcome. So that is where it's at. I just need to sit down and figure out what motor I think is going to be the smallest that will also get the job done. And then the mini CNC machine, that is frankly just waiting for me to get off my butt and do something with Marlin. Originally, I was going to try to get the 2x16 LCD working with Marlin, because in theory it's supposed to be able to, but there's nothing online explaining how to exactly, at least that I could find, explaining how exactly to go about that and what exactly you need to hook up for the button, which was the big issue, because the button's actually on the LCD screen for the other boards that come with such an LCD screen. However, one of those things that it was not terribly interesting to me, so I should probably just give up on doing the 2x16 LCD screen and just pick out a normal solution for the mini CNC, at which point it will be up and running. And the desk, desk gantry, yeah, the desk gantry is what I'm calling it. I had a revelation on that one. It's not something I'm going to be able to do, like assemble, build on stream, design on stream, but I think I like where I'm going with this. So I will do it, and then I will show you guys what I've done. And again, once the gantry is up and running, then that should enable different camera angles much more easily, and I won't have this stupid microphone hopefully right in front of my face. At least the microphone arm will definitely not be right in front of my face. So that is that. I think that's all the projects we need to talk about right now. And yep, that's it from me. So again, 20-minute outro, typical 20-minute outro. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for watching if you have been, and I hope you have a great and wonderful day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're at in the world. And I'll catch you next time.